All right, let's get into it. Trump's plan to send who he calls criminal illegal aliens to Guantanamo Bay. You've probably seen some headlines flying around about it, but we're going to take a deep dive today and really get into what's actually going on here.
Yeah, definitely a lot of layers to unpack.
To start off, maybe we should just address like the most obvious thing, Guantanamo Bay. Most people think about the detention camp for terrorism suspects.
Right.
But Trump's talking about sending something like 30,000 deported migrants there. So what are we even really talking about here?
Well, I think it's important to make the distinction between the high-security prison for those suspected terrorists and then this separate detention facility that's also on the Guantanamo Bay naval base.
Right.
And that facility's been used historically for migrants that were intercepted at sea, mostly from Haiti, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic.
Oh, interesting. So this isn't like a totally new thing then?
Right, exactly. It's not unprecedented. The U.S. has definitely used Guantanamo Bay before to detain migrants. It's just that the scale of what Trump's proposing is, it's got a lot of people concerned.
Yeah, for sure. So Trump initially said that there were 30,000 beds already available, but then he later mentioned that they need to expand the facility. So how do we make sense of those two things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And honestly, that's where things start to get a little murky. Vince Warren from the Center for Constitutional Rights, he's argued that that facility has been basically falling apart for decades.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think it would have the capacity that Trump's claiming at all.
Okay.
So that discrepancy, it definitely raises some red flags about how realistic this plan even is and, what the legal ramifications could be.
Yeah, especially if the conditions there aren't actually suitable for, housing that many people. I mean, could there be legal challenges because of that?
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. To house 30,000 people, you need a massive amount of infrastructure, right? You need the housing units themselves. You need food services, medical care, security personnel.
Yeah.
And to ramp all of that up that quickly, especially at a remote location like Guantanamo Bay,
right,
that's a huge logistical hurdle.
For sure. So let's talk about the money side of this. Who's going to be paying for all of this? Has the administration even addressed the cost at all?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's a really important one. And so far, there's been no public information about what the costs might be, which is a little concerning because then there are questions about, is there going to be congressional oversight? And who's ultimately going to be footing the bill for all of this is going to be the taxpayer.
Right. Okay. So we've got these logistical challenges, we've got financial questions, and we got these potential legal hurdles. But maybe we should get back to the core of this whole thing. Who are these criminal illegal aliens that Trump wants to send to Guantanamo?
Yeah, so the administration has really emphasized that they're focusing on deporting migrants who have criminal convictions.
Okay.
But the thing is, the definition of what criminal means has gotten a lot broader under the Trump administration.
Okay, so it's not just serious offenses.
Exactly. It could include people who have committed really minor offenses, even things like traffic violations. There have even been cases where people are facing deportation for convictions that were later overturned.
Wow.
So it definitely raises questions about, is this really fair? Are people getting due process?
Yeah, that's a little unsettling.
Yeah.
One of the articles we looked at talked about this ICE arrest of an illegal alien for some alleged crimes. And it kind of makes you wonder, how far could this go? Could someone who has a minor offense from their past, but they've been living a totally law-abiding life since then, could they suddenly be at risk?
That's a question a lot of people are asking, and it's a valid one. We're not just talking about statistics here. We're talking about real people. People who might have built whole lives here. They have families, they have jobs, they contribute to their communities.
Yeah.
And now they're facing this uncertainty.
So it seems like the administration's thinking of Guantanamo as kind of a temporary housing situation until they can find other countries that are willing to accept these deported migrants.
Right.
But what does temporary even mean in this context?
Well, that's one of the biggest unknowns, right?
Right.
The administration hasn't really said anything specific about a timeline or what the criteria would be for releasing people. And, given the history of indefinite detention at Guantanamo's military prison,
right,
it's definitely a concern that people could be held there indefinitely without a clear way to get out. And we also can't really ignore, the international piece of all this. This plan has already gotten a lot of criticism from the international community, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel called it an act of brutality.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's not super surprising given, what Guantanamo Bay represents and the fact that it's on Cuban soil, just to the U.S.
Right, exactly. Guantanamo Bay comes with a lot of historical baggage. It's basically become a symbol of human rights violations, indefinite detention, a lack of due process.
Mm-hmm.
So using it to house migrants, even on a temporary basis, you can see how that would really damage the U.S.'s reputation.
Yeah.
And it could even make it harder to cooperate with other countries on important issues.
It does feel kind of like a step backward, especially after, years of trying to improve how the U.S. is perceived on human rights.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about the U.S. commitment to international law and, even to its own values.
Okay, so we've talked about the politics, the legal stuff, but what about the human cost here? What kind of conditions can these migrants expect if they end up at Guantanamo Bay?
That's a big concern, right? I mean, that migrant detention facility has been mostly empty for years, and we don't really know what kind of shape it's in. Is it even habitable for a large number of people?
Yeah.
Even if it is structurally sound, there are still questions about things like medical care, sanitation, just basic necessities.
Yeah, not to mention the psychological impact, right?
Mm.
I mean, being detained in a place like Guantanamo Bay with that kind of reputation.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The psychological toll of detention like that, especially in a place that's associated with human rights abuses, that can be really, really damaging.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that a lot of these migrants are fleeing from violence or persecution or extreme poverty.
Right.
So to go through all of that and then end up in Guantanamo Bay, I mean, that would be incredibly traumatic.
It just seems like such an expensive and potentially inhumane solution to a problem that's already really complex.
Yeah, it's hard to see a clear justification for it. To me, it seems like a lot of logistical challenges, ethical questions, and potential costs, and it's not even clear what it would accomplish.
So what happens now? Does the administration have a real plan for how to implement all this, or is it still kind of up in the air?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And so far, the answers we've gotten have been pretty vague and contradictory. They've talked about expanding the facility, but no real details on how they do that or how much it would cost. And there's been talk about finding other countries to take these deported migrants, but no specifics on which countries or what kind of agreements are being made.
So basically, we're just kind of waiting to see what happens. More questions than answers.
Pretty much.
And what about Congress? What role do they play in this whole thing?
Well, Congress has a big role, right? They control the money so they can approve or deny funding for this plan.
Yep.
And they also have a responsibility to hold the administration accountable to demand answers to all these unanswered questions.
Yeah, it seems like given all the challenges we've talked about, logistical, financial, ethical, there's bound to be some pushback, right? Both here in the U.S. and internationally.
Oh, absolutely. This is definitely not a done deal. There are a lot of hurdles to overcome, and it remains to be seen whether the administration can actually pull this off logistically, legally, and ethically.
So let's bring it back to the potential impact on everyday people. I mean, this isn't just some theoretical policy debate happening in Washington. This could actually affect people we know, people in our own communities.
That's right. And that's what makes that broader definition of criminal so concerning. We're talking about people who may have built lives here. They have families, they have jobs, they contribute to their communities.
Mm-hmm.
And now they could be facing deportation for something that happened years ago, something they maybe already served time for.
Right. The Fox News article we read highlighted some of the ICE arrests that have happened recently. And it seems like they're definitely going after people with serious criminal backgrounds.
Yeah.
But where do you draw the line? What about someone who, I don't know, got a DUI 10 years ago, or maybe shoplifted as a teenager?
Okay.
Are they suddenly considered a threat to national security?
I mean, that's the slippery slope argument, and it's a valid one. When you start expanding the definition of criminal to include those kinds of minor offenses, it creates a lot of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah, people might start to self-censor, afraid to speak out or participate in their communities.
Exactly. Yeah. It erodes trust in the system and makes people less likely to cooperate with law enforcement.
Right.
And ultimately, it makes us all less safe.
So what can people do if they're concerned about this plan and how it might affect their communities?
Well, the most important thing is to stay informed. Understand your rights and the rights of people around you.
Right.
Know what to do if you or someone you know is approached by IC. And supporting organizations that provide legal aid and advocate for immigrants' rights is huge.
And what about just speaking up, like contacting your elected officials, going to town halls, making your voice heard?
Absolutely. This isn't just an immigration issue. It's a human rights issue that affects all of us.
Right. It's about standing up for what you believe in.
Exactly. And remember, this plan, while it's definitely concerning, is still just a plan. It faces legal challenges, potential funding roadblocks, and there's a lot of opposition from different groups. So there's a chance it might never actually happen.
So there's still hope.
Always. But hope isn't a strategy, right? We have to stay vigilant, stay engaged, and keep pushing for a more just and humane immigration system.
Well said. This has been a heavy topic, but I think we've managed to shed some light on the complexities of it and what's really at stake here.
I hope so. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the political rhetoric, but it's so important to step back and think critically about the potential consequences of these policies.
For all of us.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, think about this. What kind of society do we want to live in? One that's driven by fear and division, or one that's built on compassion and respect for everyone?
Yeah, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this, especially when you think about how it could affect, us and our communities.
I hear you. But I think knowledge is power, right? The more we understand about these issues, the better we can deal with them.
So let's try to break it down. We talked about this, expanded definition of criminal.
Hmm.
And it seems like the administration is really focused on deporting people with serious criminal records. But where does that leave someone who, I don't know, maybe made a mistake a long time ago? Something small, something they've already done their time for and moved on from. Are they suddenly at risk too?
That's a tough one. And honestly, there isn't a simple answer. The administration hasn't really explained what they consider a serious offense. So it's kind of a gray area, which is causing a lot of fear for people who have those minor offenses from their past.
Yeah, it just feels like there's so much uncertainty.
There really is. And it also makes you think about the potential for, racial profiling and discrimination.
Right, because...
Absolutely. There's a real chance that this plan could end up disproportionately impacting communities of color.
Yeah.
And they're already overrepresented in the criminal justice system.
So what can we do about all this? How can we protect ourselves and our communities if this plan actually happens?
Well, I think awareness is a big part of it. Educating yourself about your rights, the rights of people around you. There are some great resources out there, like the ACLU and the National Immigration Law Center. They provide a lot of information and legal support for immigrants.
Okay, that's good to know. And what if you or someone you know actually gets approached by ICE? What should you do?
The most important thing is to stay calm. And remember, you have rights. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney.
Right.
Don't sign anything without talking to a lawyer first.
It sounds like we need to be proactive, not reactive. We can't wait for something bad to happen before we start taking action.
I totally agree. We need to be prepared. We need to be informed, and we need to be ready to stand up for ourselves and our communities. That means contacting our elected officials, going to town hall meetings, supporting organizations that are fighting for immigrants' rights.
So really, it's about holding our leaders accountable and demanding a system that's fair and humane.
Exactly. This isn't just an immigration issue. It's about who we are as a country and what we believe in.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive. It's been a lot to take in, but hopefully we've been able to give you some insights and help you feel a little more informed and maybe even empowered.
Yeah, and remember, this is an ongoing conversation. So stay curious, keep asking questions, and most importantly, stay hopeful.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a topic that matters.
Until next time.